opponent that's not moving and going away from the light was offense because you're breaking away. That was one of the first articles that we did with reactive agility that doesn't have an opponent, so it's probably not the most accurate thing, but it's something that gave us the next stepping block to start to ask questions about where we would want to go with the research. So the last one that Sean just talked about was the most recent one and the most applicable to not really using any tools. We talked about cognition with her, so your attentional focus and what you can get out of your body depending on the processing time of the person. And then also limits in perceptual cognitive ability displayed as breakdown in movement during competition. So that's one thing that affects another, that if you don't have that perceptive and cognitive ability, you can start thinking, well, are they too weak, or are they just not able to process it fast enough and respond? And with some of the work that we did, these were some of the questions I kept starting to ask, and so for further research, we have lots of stuff that we can look into. And then lastly, we already talked about this pre-planned versus unplanned movements. A lot of her research shows specifically that you will have a greater risk of injury if you cannot execute a pre-planned movement before you start putting them into spatial constraints, temporal constraints, and all of that stuff. So let's take the correlations that we know and recognize that that's just the science piece, but we have the art piece as well. So talking about the science of it all, we have to understand as coaches, and this is again a tribute to when your freshman or whoever your client walks into you the first day, you don't know all this stuff, so you have to build that relationship and learn about them, their biomechanics, behavior, movement, skill level, and tendencies, which I think plays into why Sean watches video clips on all of his clients a million times before they even get to it. Not all of us have the luxury of time to do that, so some of this stuff kind of happens concurrently with getting to know your athlete with the time that you have, especially if you're in a college system. Why do they display certain patterns? Can they also identify, oh, well, this happened? So having that conversation after the game or whatnot gets you to really learn more about their tendencies. And then how to prescribe solutions, and I love that Sean talked about this yesterday, because you don't want to tell them what to do, but you want to facilitate something that gets them to own the movement and recognize in the motion and the moment. So you can prescribe solutions from not a standpoint of this is exactly how you have to do it, because it's not always going to manifest itself that way on the field, but they need to have that movement signature that they feel, that they learn, and that they know that they own and can reproduce because they understand. So where do we start when we're trying to make the right decision or the wrong decision in training or as an athlete? So if we look back at some of the science stuff, this is a lot, this is the only slide on this, so we're going to touch on it this much. But we need to, bottom line, understand the sport and the athlete and understand all the different constraints that guide their decision making in their respective sport environment. So movements occur in response to a dynamic interaction of the mover and his or her environment, and their pattern of movement is thought to emerge or self-organize as a function of the ever-changing constraints placed upon it. So it's a dynamic system, it's a dynamic field, lots of stuff that they're going to have to be ready for. So the more attuned they are to that, and that's all in how you layer your training and expose them to that stimulus, that's how all of these different the organism, environment, task, and the relationships between them sort of play out to get better and better with experience. So our buddy Bernstein, I know that's Sean's best friend, of course he's onto something, right? You have degrees of freedom, and you have an athlete that doesn't really know what to do with all of that, right? So that's the problem that your athlete is coming to you with, and if you can understand what your goal is as a coach, and you can solve a problem, you're probably the best coach in the world in their mindset, because you're getting them somewhere, they're getting results. But finding the solution is not so easy. So some of the things that we've done, and I blatantly just stole from Sean one day, was different drills in a freeze type setting. Get them to feel what it feels like if you could freeze frame something. So say it's a cut, and you go and do a sit drill where you run up and you stop and sit for a quick second. You can decrease the amount of time you're allowed to change direction just to get them to feel the motion. So freezing movements and taking away non-essential things that they don't have to worry about in that moment is one way that you can try to train it. And then you can start to throw in things and layer things as they have success with that. There's different stages of learning. So you get the motor control and biomechanics that they're still learning, what we talked about before, their movement signature or how they're going to do stuff. And as a coach, you have this eye to really understand their task and the demands put on them, and then a way to say, well, let's try this. Or how did that feel? Some of my best coaching sessions, I kind of walked in without a plan and went off of the athlete. And then when they started to figure it out and you could see their light bulb went off, granted, it's very fortunate I was able to do a one-on-one in that time, and sometimes in a college setting it's very hard to do that, depending on how many teams and athletes you're working with. But that coach's eye, the better you get with it, you can do that and shout it out in multiple athletes' sessions and be able to pick it out. So that's something that develops as we develop it. And then retention. Again, we talked about deliberate practice and them owning the movement pattern. That's how they're really going to learn. So I kind of took, this is actually from a golf biomechanics article, and I put simple in quotes and question marks, because the golf swing to me is really not simple. The more I hang around golfers this past year, the more I have great respect for the little ball and the little hole and the 400 yards in between them, plus the wind, the sun, the crowd, the distractors at home, limitations physically, and it's like, okay, it's not simple, but for this classification of simple, this might be simple in the sense that you don't have someone coming at you at X miles an hour ready to take your head off or your knees out. You don't have, wet grass that you're trying to cut off of in a rainstorm while you're trying to play football with mud all over your face. So in terms of taking out those things and focusing on a sport where all you have to do is rotate and hit a ball, it's still highly complex, but compared to the football field or soccer field, it's pretty simple. So you take a look at all the degrees of freedom and just looking at citing Bill Cheatham, who's the one who wrote the golf biomechanics article. This is all the degrees of freedom of just them, and they are pretty stationary compared to some of our field athletes. But then you look at our field athletes, and how do you get them to go from frozen movements to free skills? How do you increase the degrees of freedom in a way that they can handle it? How do you help with their greater decision-making ability? Because the greater decision-making ability they have, they're going to display more body control in their movement output. And then, of course, you just continue to expose them to more if they're more advanced movers. And then, of course, here comes Instagram. And Science for Sport is one of my favorite pages on Instagram, because the major things here I love is the considerations. Focus on technique, allow for specificity, and learn early. So if you're working with younger athletes, or we're going to have long-term athletic development also this afternoon, you're looking at those considerations. There's this part that we didn't even talk about with how it gets grooved in the brain, neuroplastic responses, and down here it peaks during childhood. So professionals who coach young athletes should capitalize on that period of time by encouraging multi-skill development. There's a huge pushback in our industry because people want to specialize their kids early. And if you're a coach that starts to see that, and you see that you have a soccer mom, and that soccer mom takes them to ODP training, I forget all the lingo for all soccer now that I'm out of that world, but they have their school training, they have ODP, they have private training, then they have travel. It's like it's kind of doing us a disservice because they're not getting that stimulus from other things that kind of make them that well-rounded mover. So then you look at factors for decision-making training, and this is where we're going to have crowd participation. So first, what decision-making factors affect sport performance? And how can we understand positional constraints and movement output when it comes to sport specific? So, because it's after lunch and we don't really want food coma, let's talk about a couple sports. I just picked 3. If your sport of expertise is not on here, but you want to throw one out there, go ahead. But just kidding, before I start picking on people, let's talk about those 2 questions for a sport. Who wants to volunteer before I start? Call on someone. Because I want to make this a little bit more interactive so we can sort of hash it out.
Like a lot of team-based sports are make decisions based on your other teammates are doing, or there's like a ball play, or the ball at safety. Your movement might be dictated by what your teammates do or your opponents do. People around you.
So if you are in a team-based setting where reacting not just to what is going on with the play, but also to where other people in their assignments are, and if they fail at those assignments, are you a bad mover? Is it a bad game plan? Do you have horrible teammates? Those are some things that are to consider as distractors too, that, like how you just kind of eloquently said it a lot better than I just did, but where other people are, and you have to adjust to that. So in a team-based sport, it's not just you moving like tennis. You got a ball coming over, and if you're fast, you find out. If you can change direction, you find out real fast if you can't. But when you have to respond to other people, that's another sport-specific consideration. So what would happen if you look at volleyball? What do you think are some positional constraints? You look at front row, outside hitters, and DSs in the back row. What are some? Avi, you work with volleyball, don't you?
I do. So, I mean, it depends. Like, if you're more of a libero, you know, your constraints, you're going to primarily, your position is going to be different than if you play in the front row. You know, there's your front row is going to be looking, you know, your middle is going to be looking more at the ball, but also at a body. You know, where your liberos are primarily going to be watching where the ball is tracking. So, I think that would be like an obvious difference between the two positions in that sport.
Think about it this way, right? Especially if you're a libero or a defensive specialist in the back, and you're looking at, okay, well, I have to be able to see where the ball's coming from, but then you have deflection, right? So you've got deflection tipped off of people's fingers. You've got people who, you know, let's just say the back row player has to adjust because someone in the back, other than them, saved the ball and now it's coming in at an angle that they're not used to drilling. Right? It's not part of the drill. That's continually repetition. I just have to enough practice to know there's repetition out the wazoo, and you still mess it up, even though it's predicted repetition. So there's a lot of different things for volleyball that you mentioned, front row versus back row, completely different of what you're looking at. Okay. I thought you raised your hand, but since
Well, most of what happens in volleyball is in front. And then when you're the setter, you're going to receive a pass in your back. A lot of times it's to the net, so it's position specific. And your movement in volleyball is like, to me, it's always a big dance. So if I slide, everybody else has to slide at the same time. So it's speed and cooperation is a big part of that.
So a lot of times we start to compartmentalize movement as just like, what does this person have to do for themselves to do their job? But their job, kind of as you talked about, is contingent on what everybody else is doing. So what about soccer? Anybody got soccer in here where they feel like they want to speak to positional constraints? Is soccer people here?
Yeah, I'm a soccer player a long time ago, but what would be the question you have?
Oh, what?
What would be the question you have for me?
So either one of those two, what kind of decision-making factors affect sport performance for soccer players, and you know, positional constraints that say a midfielder might have versus obviously a goalkeeper a little bit?
Sure. The system the team is playing and how the reaction of all my co-players are, there is a common consensus which has been trained before. It's pretty complex.
And so to ask these questions, which is kind of the foundation of sports specificity when we talk about movement, now doesn't it make your head spin like, oh man, I'm going to hate you when I leave because you make me think about things that I didn't want to think about. So the bottom line is, what do you have to do? How do you have to do it? And how do you make it automatic? Because at the end of the day, we don't want to have to think. We can make it automatic, and that's hard because it's a constant changing environment. It's a lot more of development that we see in our athletes. So came across on the wonderful internet Dr. Aaron Swanson of PT in Asheville, North Carolina, and these are some of the things that he sorts of groups into those three cognitive, associative, and autonomous categories of considerations in how our athletes are going to learn in terms of movement. All right, so let's go back. Physical capacity. Tim Gabbett classified athletes as fast thinkers, fast movers, which is green, because that would be awesome if all of them were. Fast thinker, slow mover, slow thinker, fast mover, and slow mover, slow thinker, which is in red because if we have that, hopefully we can pull off a miracle somewhere, at least maybe make it faster. However, I start thinking, well, shoot, what's one good without the other? What good is it being as sharp athlete that can process well, but you can't get there because you're not fast enough. And what good is it if you can deadlift 900 pounds, but you can't apply that force and create the right impulse to move your weight fast? So, what's one good without the other? And ideally, we're probably all striving for the green, but we're trying to constantly figure out how to get them there. But we do know that speed and acceleration, 9 times out of 10 for most of our sports, is going to be something that is required of all athletes. So, how many of you are strength coaches as well? Like you handle the strength side of the stuff. So you're going to have them in the weight room. Lance Walker from Michael Johnson Performance had just watched a video of him presenting at Hammer Strength online the other day, and I was like, this is going in last minute. I love this. This is perfect. And so his presentation was amazing, and I fell in love with how he said, listen, take things related to acceleration and speed, so your positioning, your angles, all of that, do it in the weight room. You don't have to have people, like you said before, deadlifting 900 pounds if you can't train impulse and get them to move their body weight fast. So the fastest people are not necessarily the strongest. So how strong is strong enough to get them to move, right? So, and the next slide you'll see